Welcome back to UKIN2 RV. Today we're going to talk about solar panels and how you can choose the right panels for you. This is going to be the first of several videos that we do relating to solar power for your RV. Please subscribe to our channel so that you can follow along on these other episodes. Hopefully this will help you when you're selecting the components for your solar system. Solar is basically simple. There's solar panels, there's a charge controller, there's wiring, there's fuses, and of course batteries. Today we're going to talk about panels. One of the newer technologies of panels, and they're not brand new, are flexible panels. These are good for rounded domed roofs like on an Airstream trailer. What's nice about them is there's no drilling required. They do tend to be more expensive. They do tend to be larger. And durability has been a question with these. I have seen that manufacturers are now offering longer warranties, but I worry about exclusions of them worrying about did somebody walk on these or things like that, because they're not made for being walked on. Another issue is the efficiency. Solar panels don't like heat. As they get warmer, their output decreases. With a rigid panel, you mount those so you've got airflow underneath, and that allows for cooling. But these flexible panels are glued down to the roof with no air gap beneath them, so they can get hotter. And I would expect that that's going to reduce their output. Another technology that's been around for quite a while is called polycrystalline. Now, its big advantage over the monocrystalline, which we'll get to in a minute, is that the polycrystalline is less expensive. The polycrystalline look very similar to the monocrystalline, except that they're a blue color. They're usually larger because their energy output per square inch isn't quite as great. They're usually thicker. They are also less efficient in low light, and they've got a reputation of a shorter lifespan. Monocrystalline are probably the most popular now. They used to be about double the cost of the polycrystalline, but due to manufacturing technique improvements and things like that, they've managed to cut the cost down to where they're pretty comparably priced. So what are some of the other advantages? They're smaller. They're not half the size, but they are smaller. They're a little thinner. They've got very good lifetimes. You'll see people warranting these things for up to 20 years. They do have the best low light performance, which is going to give them more charging hour per day than any of the other types of panels, which when the sun starts coming up in the morning and the sun rises, these panels are going to start putting out power sooner than the others, and they're going to continue putting power later into the evening. Like I said, these are the most popular, and this is the technology that I would recommend unless you have to have the flexible. Now that you're shopping for your monocrystalline rigid panels, how do you tell which is the best panel for you? Well, they've got a bunch of specifications, so let me go through what the most popular specifications you're going to run across. All right, maximum power rating. Manufacturers use the same techniques to develop this rating, and it's a pretty good apples to apples comparison of the power output from these panels. Now, that said, if somebody claims they've got a 200 watt panel, for instance, you will probably never see 200 watts output of that panel. These are under ideal laboratory conditions, and your panels are going to have differences in light, temperature, etc., etc. They'll also report on cell efficiency. This is not a deal breaker. I personally don't really care what the individual cell efficiency is. I'm going to look at the power output of the panel and compare that to its size if I want to compare two different panels of the same wattage. The optimum operating voltage. Again, this is the voltage that this was putting out under laboratory conditions. It's nothing that you can replicate, and it's nothing that you want to take advantage of. It's more of a specification that the engineers threw in to entertain us. optimum operating current. This again is the current that this was putting out under these ideal laboratory conditions. Open circuit voltage. Now this is a key specification because this is going to tell you what's the output of this panel when it's disconnected. And this is the type of reading you would get when your panel's out in the sun and you test it with your voltage meter before you hook it up to your system. This is a really important voltage that you'll need when you're selecting your charge controller, and we're going to talk about that in an upcoming video. Short circuit current. Now this is also an important specification, but more to deal with safety. You're going to use this number to help you determine what wire size you need and what fuse size you need. I will talk some more about this later. All right, maximum system voltage. Now this is not a performance rating, but it's something you're going to use, especially if you're putting your panels in series. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Maximum system fuse rating. This is a pretty important safety specification. This is going to tell you what is the highest rating of fuse you can have between your solar panels and your charge controller. Now that we've made it through the specifications, let's talk about the installation and connection features you should look for or expect. Make sure that you buy brackets for your rigid panels that are going to have the panels up off of your roof and allow for airflow. It's important that you allow for this airflow to keep your panels cooler, which that will not only improve their lifespan, but will improve their performance. Most panels have what are called MC-4 connectors, and you'll want to connect your wiring using those connectors also. They're really the industry standard. They're waterproof and durable. They do require some special tools, a special crimper, which you can pick up for in the mid-20s and never be able to use it really on anything else because these connectors are unique, and some cheap plastic wrenches that they sell for these that allow you to tighten the nut down to ensure that they're waterproof, and it's also got some prongs on it that allow you to release these connectors when you want to disconnect them. Another consideration will be when panels are mounted flat on your roof, you'll lose about 30% possible efficiency because of the sun angle you've got. So one way that people take care of this is they put tilting brackets underneath their solar panels. Now there's two ways to do that. The most inexpensive are the type that are manual, but this does require you climbing up on your roof every time you set up to tilt your brackets, and it requires you to orient your RV when you park so that you can tilt your panels up towards the south so that you can take advantage of the sun. And then when you get ready to leave, you're going to have to climb up there again to put them down. It increases some weight, but my biggest concern is climbing on the roof. What if it's raining or snowing and I need to climb up on the roof to get my panels down? That's not going to be safe. I've chosen to have my panels flat mounted. I'll tolerate the loss in efficiency. There's also powered tilting brackets. Of course, those are more expensive yet and require some wiring and control, but they are very convenient once they're up there. Lastly, we're going to talk about configuration of the panels. And rather than try and describe this, I'm going to use my artistic talents and draw this on the whiteboard. Now, those of you that have been with the channel for a while might remember this whiteboard. This was featured in what may be one of the worst videos on YouTube. And yes, I will put a link to that in the information below this video. First, we're going to talk about parallel connections. And parallel wiring, just like with batteries, you hook the plus to the plus, the minus to the minus. So here I have two crudely drawn solar panels with a positive and negative connection on each panel. So to do a parallel connection, we would combine these two, and then we would combine the black, and then we would take these wires out to the charge controller. And that's a parallel connection. When you wire in parallel, your output current increases. So in this example, we have 2 panels. Let's assume each panel has a 5 amp output. That makes my math easy. That means that we're going to have 10 amps going out. Now, these are 12 volt panels. 12 volt panels don't put out 12 volts. They really put out about 17 volts. So we've got 17 volts here and 17 volts here, and we're wired in parallel. Our output voltage is going to remain the same. So we're going to still be at 17 volts. So again, when we wire parallel, our current is going to double, our voltage is going to stay the same. One of the big disadvantages with the parallel is as my current increases, my wire size going to my charge controllers may need to be increased. So it's the least popular way to mount solar panels because of that. The other way to wire panels is in series. To wire in series, what we do is we take the minus off of one panel and the positive on another and wire them together. Now, if we were to take the other positive and the other negative and wire them together, we'd have a dead short. So that's not what we do, obviously. So we come up here, and we come over here, and we go to our charge controller here. Now, when we do this, again, let's assume that these are our 5 amp panels and that they're putting out 17 volts. So when we're doing this, our amperage doesn't increase. So we're going to have 5 amps. That's going to mean we can use smaller wire going to our charge controller. Our voltage, however, is going to double. We're going to be up to 34 volts. That's 17 plus 17, we get to the 34. What that's going to help us do is reduce our resistance loss to the charge controller. We're going to be able to use standard wire, which is typically 10 amp, and that means that all of our connectors are standard connectors. Those MC4 connectors usually accommodate only up to the 10 gauge wiring. I'll get into this more when we talk about charge controllers in an upcoming video, but a charge controller will not turn on until the panels are putting out voltage greater than the battery voltage. The charge controller that I use needs the panel output to be 5 volts higher than the battery voltage before it will charge. So let's say I wake up in the morning and my batteries are at 12.5 volts. That means I have to have 17.5 volts to wake up my charge controller. So wired in series, that I'm going to be cruising along at 34 volts as soon as they get light. As soon as they get any light, they're going to be at 17 volts. As the light increases, it's not going to be very long before I hit the 17.5 volt mark, which turns on my charge controller earlier in the morning than if I were wired to parallel. It's also going to stay on later in the evening. So you're going to get more charging time if you wire in series. That's one of the advantages. Now, it is going to require that you be very picky about your charge controller because not all charge controllers can take voltage above the 17 volts or whatever your output of a single panel is, or panels wired in parallel. We'll talk more about charge controller selections in an upcoming video. So my recommendation is that you look at a series. So as a recap, I would go with rigid panels if you can. I would go with monocrystalline panels, and I'd wire them in series. I hope that you found these explanations helpful and that this will aid you as you try and put together your solar system. Please subscribe so that you can follow along in my future videos about this topic. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you in the next video. My opinions and preferences are based on my experiences and observations. Yours may be different.